What's up, my friends? I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and I have a question for you. I guess I always have questions for you. That's kind of how we start out. It's sort of fun. It's how we get to know each other. Hey, have you ever had a relationship with somebody where it's not like it's unhealthy or bad, but you are in the position of the sidecar and they are very much in the position of the one that has their hands on the handlebars and they're running the show? A position where maybe you're kind of learning and they're kind of teaching and they're trying to show you stuff and get you to figure things out, but it's hard because they know what they're doing and you don't really know what you're doing yet. If you have ever been in that kind of mentoring relationship before with a very patient, qualified mentor, you can get to a place where you're in your own head a little bit and you're like, I don't know what you want me to say. I know, teacher person, that this is evident to you and that it should be self-evident to me, but I can't figure it out, and now I think I'm thinking about the wrong stuff, and I'm confused. Could we please just start over? Could you please just give me the answer? I promise I'm trying to learn. And I think we might be getting to that place here in Matthew chapter 16, where the disciples, who didn't really know what they didn't know earlier in the book of Matthew, are getting to a place where they kind of are starting to know what they don't know. And they look at Jesus in challenge after challenge and confrontation after confrontation. And the more they look at him, the more they're like, I can't do what you do. I thought I knew stuff about religion and ideas and how to handle my own, but the most impressive minds in the world are coming up to you, Jesus, and they keep picking a fight with you, and I would wilt, and you're so cool and calm, and you know exactly what to do and what to say and when to engage and when not and when to get in a boat and sail away again. And I'm pretty sure I would screw the whole thing up. I mean, if I'm a disciple, that's what I'm thinking the whole time. And now we get to a place where the religious leadership from the big town has showed up. In chapter 15, they're picking a fight with Jesus about things. And the fight is actually directed at the disciples, who no doubt were very happy to hide behind the robe of Jesus and be like, I don't know why we don't wash our hands. Jesus, please answer the question about why we don't wash our hands right. These people are important. They can hurt our families. I'm scared. And then we go on our little travel tour for the rest of chapter 15. We get back into a boat. We sail back into territory that is under the influence of these religious leaders. And the disciples have had a little break, a little time away to not feel that pressure. And now all of a sudden, here they are back in Jewish territory, and they're immediately met with another one of these very difficult situations. And Jesus, again, immediately handles it perfectly. And I think at this point, what we see from the disciples as we get into the beginning and middle of chapter 16 is they realize how deficient they are, and they're not quite sure what lessons Jesus is trying to teach them at this point because of their insecurity. So the Pharisees and Sadducees at the beginning of chapter 16, they're like, hey, give us another sign. Jesus is like, yeah. You guys are so astute that you can look at the sky, you know what the weather's going to do just from the color of it, but you can't tell what it means when the lame walk and the deaf can hear and the blind can see and dead people come back to life and it all happens in the name of God. Like, yeah, I think you guys are not operating in good faith. And my paraphrase there is not as harsh as Jesus actually was. He tells them off. And then he says, you're only going to get one miraculous sign. It's going to be the sign of Jonah. And that's, of course, a reference to his death, burial, and resurrection. It says then in Matthew 16:4, Jesus then left them and went away. And that leaving and going away is, we're going to find, taking us on another boat trip across the Sea of Galilee again. So verse 5 goes like this. When they went across the lake, the Sea of Galilee, the disciples forgot to take bread. Well, bummer. I mean, that can happen. You got a lot going on. There's a lot of pressure. Okay. But then Jesus says, be careful, be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. No, they discussed it, that being the disciples among themselves, and said, it's because we didn't bring any bread. But aware of their discussion, Jesus asked, you have little faith, why are you talking among yourselves about having no bread? Do you still not understand? Don't you remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000, or how many basketfuls you gathered, or the 7 loaves for the 4,000, and how many basketfuls you gathered? How is it you don't understand that I was not talking about your bread? Be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Then they understood that he was not telling them to guard against the yeast and the bread, but against the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. On the one hand, we can always read these passages where we interact with the disciples and they don't get it and be like, you guys are so dumb. You're like simple little babies with little baby brains and you just don't understand how things are and you get everything wrong. But I wouldn't get things wrong because of how smart I am now and how much I know. Yeah, but come on, we got a Bible and 2,000 years of Christianity, and we weren't the ones that were walking out there and exposing ourselves against the wishes of probably a lot of our family members and risking our jobs and our necks politically and socially in order to be the first adopters of who this Jesus guy was and what he was claiming. These guys were taking a huge risk and being like, yeah, I think you might be the promised king, and I think this is the kingdom that's happening right here. We're just going to go ahead and roll with it no matter what and see how this works out. So we got to cut these guys a little bit of slack here. And also, they're around genius at an unprecedented level. They're around a guy who in one chapter of our rendering of the Bible, Matthew 13, can tell, what would we come up with, like 7 stories with this tiny amount of words that communicate gallons of transcendent truth that rewire and challenge everything we know about how reality is and what the relationship between humanity and death and eternity and God is about. And so I think these guys can be forgiven if they're in their own heads a little bit here because they can't totally track with everything on the fly in real time. Now, I don't know if it was their job to remember the bread when they go on boat trips on lakes. I would think it would be. I mean, at my house, I'm kind of like, the alpha because I'm the dad. And so it's the kid's job to grab some snacks or something. Maybe there's some kind of thing that we know that I'm not aware of, that this was like a sign of subservience on the part of a student who's training with a rabbi. Actually, I'm at Jeff's house. Jeff, you got a phone? Can you Google that and see if this was like some kind of tradition where rabbis and students had some kind of deal where it was their job to remember the bread and it would be a big deal if they forgot it, like more than just, hey, now we don't have sandwiches and that's not good. Thank you. Jeff's on it. So whatever the case here, I mean, it's a mistake. There's not going to be like a quick place to stop and get a bite to eat. And maybe they didn't understand how big a trip they were about to embark on. I mean, we're going to discover as we work our way through the next few chapters that this is kind of it, with only a couple of exceptions for Jesus and the disciples' time in northern Galilee. Now we're headed in a different direction. The narrative is going to move geographically to a new place. So maybe they just didn't get what the itinerary was. Maybe this confrontation with the Pharisees and Sadducees was really aggressive. It ended quickly and abruptly, and everybody feels weird. And Jesus is like, let's go. We're getting in the boat. Get in the boat. We're leaving, kids. And there just wasn't time to get bread. I have no idea. Whatever the case, these guys are so awash and so overwhelmed at the prospect that somehow they might someday have to talk about these things and deal with these things, as Jesus told them that they were going to have to at some point in Matthew chapter 10. They forget the bread, and now they're just embarrassed that they messed up. And maybe they don't want Jesus to be disappointed with them. Like, it scares me when he gets mad like that. I don't like it when he raises his voice, and I hope he doesn't raise his voice at us over the bread thing. And so Jesus makes this remark about, be careful, be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Now, come on. You and me hearing it here know that remark is innocuous, at least in terms of being a criticism toward those guys. Jesus isn't getting on their case. He's just basically saying, hey, as the ship literally is sailing, so metaphorically, the ship has sailed on the reliability of those guys. Any illusion you guys were still under that those are people you should be listening to, come on, you just saw it with your own eyes. You need to be on guard against that. Why yeast? I mean, what an odd thing to say, what strange images and punchlines that might conjure. But I think it's pretty simple. A little bit of yeast works through the whole dough. In fact, Jesus used this exact example just in this Bible here 3 pages ago in chapter 13. You got the parable of the yeast. It's one of the little micro parables that comes up here. And there the yeast is a nice thing because it expands and permeates something and it affects this larger body of something with just this tiny little thing. Like the values of the kingdom can affect the whole thing. Well, here it's flipped around to the negative side, and so it's kind of an interesting completion to the thought that this little thing that can affect a lot of things can really work in either direction. Jeff, did you find anything on the thing?
A lot of people are connecting it to the feeding of the 4,000 and the baskets of leftovers and why they didn't have them with them.
Okay, so you're not finding anything where people are like, hey, this is some kind of tradition and they should have had the bread and it was like a tremendous failure in their unspoken social contract with a rabbi. It's just, why wouldn't you have bread because you had 12 baskets? Like, you should be fine on bread. Yeah, that's a valid question. Thank you, Jeffrey. So Jesus makes this important point and offers this important instruction where, in his mind, it should be clear enough to these guys by now that there is no fruit to be had in continuing to try to do a little bit of both, like some Jesus, but also those guys might have a point. Jesus is effectively saying, all in with me, they don't have any point. They're just wrong about all of this stuff. And further, beware of the contagious ideas, the infection that could come with this malice, this thing that is boiling under the surface with them. Now, I'm drawing on a whole lot of context there to inflict those words on Jesus' warning, but I don't think what I'm saying, how I'm characterizing it, is unfair. Whatever the case, they're like, dang it, we didn't bring bread. Jesus is upset. And then Jesus is aware of it. And, as I just read a minute ago, he's like, you have little faith. Why are you talking among yourselves about having no bread? So he's not mad that they forgot the leftovers. Maybe the leftovers needed to stay where they stayed with the Gentiles at Decapolis stock. Whatever, it's fine. But do you still not understand? Don't you remember how everybody got fed and everything got taken care of? So how is it that you don't understand that I was not talking to you about bread? I mean, his point here is, guys, I can call existence out of non-existence. Like, you've seen me make an arm out of a not arm. You've seen me make life out of death. You've seen me make bread out of literally nothing. Don't worry about the bread thing. Remember in the Sermon on the Mount, guys? Like, don't worry about what you're going to eat or any of that stuff. Like, God knows that you need it. That stuff's all covered. Remember how you learned to pray the thing about give us this day our daily bread? Like, we'll get the bread. The bread is fine. What I'm warning you about is not to get hungry and chase after specious bread that looks good, but it's not actually good. Stuff that seems like truth, but it's not truth. What I'm trying to warn you about is that stuff is fake, and that stuff is dangerous. Be on your guard against it. Keep an eye out for it. This stuff is problematic, and it's not the stuff of the kingdom. Hey, last thought here. I've been sending out those little Matthew booklets to a whole bunch of you. I still have a few to go. It takes a surprisingly large amount of time to get all of that stuff stuffed in envelopes and out the door the right way and to the right place. But what I'm finding is that I've had a couple of those mailed back, and we're having a little bit of difficulty tracking down a few addresses. So if you have the ability to jump onto your account at patreon.com/the TMBH podcast and make sure your address is up to date, it will make it way easier for me to send you a cool thing to say thank you for being awesome and supporting the program. And on that note, we're going to call it a day. I'm Matt. This is the 10 Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.